So let's shift to our trending topic, McMillions, this HBO docuseries. The really cool thing about this is that this case has been closed for over 20 years, and it's only now that most of the American public is finding this out. And so this is a salacious story. It's stranger than fiction. You have organized crime. You have basically the American icon of McDonald's. You have the FBI in one of the craziest and funniest operations ever. But I have a second question. We don't have to spend a lot of time on this because in a lot of ways, when I first saw this trailer about this, I was wondering, I never knew this, right? So have you ever found out something later on as an adult about your family or other stuff that kind of threw you for a loop that you didn't realize was true? Do either of you have any stories like that?
Frank, I think you should start with this one.
I'll just keep it brief. Took 23andMe. Somebody contacted me that I should get on Ancestry. I went on Ancestry, and it turns out I have a half-sister that I never knew anything about, so there's that.
I'm sorry, what was that? Can you say it a little louder?
There's a half-sister that I have in Oklahoma City.
Which is cool.
Yeah.
But that's a lot.
Well, yeah, that's
a lot.
So, PSA, do not, I repeat, do not do 23andMe.
23andMe?
Don't do 23andMe and Ancestry. Just walk away. There's nothing to see.
Or do it if you're interested.
Sure.
There could be a surprise.
How about you, Emma Kate?
Well, I have lots of things that have always surprised me, but that's because sometimes I miss details on stuff. But I was adopted and have recently started the process of looking for my biological family. And I did actually make contact with my biological mother briefly through letter and social worker. And there's a lot of things that I have learned after the fact. So,
yeah, this show really dives into secrets, right?
Yes.
And things that you would never believe unless somebody told you and verified that it's true. And so by the time this podcast episode drops, the final episode of McMillions will have aired. And so we haven't had a chance to watch it yet. But what do you guys so far think about what this docuseries has revealed about this multi-million-dollar scam?
I will say, I mean, it blew me away, but also the story is so complicated that it's like I need to diagram it all out to figure out who's doing what and when they do that and how they meet this. And also, I don't really believe in chance. I think everything happens for a reason, and I felt like I was sort of seeing that happen as well. But it got me having conversations with people about the story. I never knew anything about it. And I also, in researching this, I didn't realize the trial started the day before 9/11. And that's why we didn't, we're all talking about 9/11 and McDonald's is, this whole thing's going down. But I started asking around, and I met somebody who, so let me be vague here, who knows somebody who has McDonald's franchises back in the 80s and 90s. They had a lot of them in another state. And during the monopoly period, the owners of the franchise would come home with big cardboard boxes filled with McDonald's fries holders and cups. And they would all sit around as a family and just peel them off and win all the prizes. So it wasn't just this, this inside job, but there were franchise owners that were just grabbing boxes, going home and taking the goods.
But that makes sense to me. I mean, because honestly, I remember I was at McDonald's constantly.
Me too.
And I was like, how many of these, Park Place and Biltmore, whatever the streets are, I don't even remember anymore. How many of them are there? There can't be that many. Yeah. And even then, I was like, you never hear about the winners. Granted, I guess you did, and I just didn't hear about them.
My buddies and I would dig through the garbage because not everybody would peel it off.
And they'd play Monopoly.
And
we would dig through. But we would go through the garbage cans because not everybody would peel the things off, and we would just grab all the garbage and peel them off.
I mean, that's fair. But yeah, I was just, I don't know what to say to that. You're like, I dig in the garbage. But I guess the thing I was the most surprised about is just how there were so many instances where this case could have been ruined. One of my favorite individuals in this series thus far is Special Agent Doug Matthews. He's just hilarious. And it sounds like, spoiler, he was the one who may have accidentally faxed the entire case summary essentially to the Greenville News Department. And there are just a lot of other things that I think are interesting because the reality is it takes so much work to go into these sorts of investigations to just have one thing. Granted, that was a pretty big oops. So, it's just really fascinating to see how the FBI kind of works at a different level.
And our sound engineer, Sean Beck, was telling me earlier today that in order to get the wiretap, and I don't know if this was in the show and I missed it, but in order to get the wiretap, they had to call
the phone company in Atlanta.
And the woman wasn't there that day. That was related to
the people
one
under
of the people under surveillance, and that's not chance. I mean, I just don't buy it. The odds of that are so infinitesimal.
Well, and when you think about the scale and scope of this particular competition and contest, we're talking about millions and millions of dollars, and they really did a nice job conveying how, it's just like if you lost $1 million piece, it's whatever. It's not that big of a deal. Or if they had some issue, it's just $1 million, and they had so much wealth to work with. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think both sides, both organized crime, committing a crime. I think the FBI building an investigation. This docu-series brilliantly showcases how so many things can go wrong on both sides.
Yes.
Right? I mean, the amount of happenstance, the amount of like serendipitous moment, all of these things that whether you believe in fate or chance, that so many things on both sides have to go right or wrong for these things to collide, and which is why it feels like it's fiction. It feels like somebody had to have made this up, but I just think we're getting a pretty inside detailed look at how this all unfolded on both sides, which you rarely get. And I think that it really does humanize the FBI versus sort of those stereotypes like Agent Matthews. Like, that is not the I mean, there's some aspects, that bravado maybe, sort of that masculine side of him. But the guy is maybe cocky at times. He's maybe bigger than his britches. He's funny. I feel like he's got a village worth of ADHD at times, just sort of zigzagging. So you get this sense of like there are real humans. They have to infiltrate organized crimes. They have to, and not everybody gets to go undercover. A lot of this is tedious, right? Tedious work. Nobody goes in the FBI necessarily to do paperwork. So you definitely get the human aspect of the investigation. But I want to shift a little bit more to talk not so much about the very convoluted and comprehensive family tree of conspirators and co-conspirators. But I want to talk a little bit about some of the everyday people that got caught up in this ring, and this idea of like, how do ordinary people, by all accounts, decent people, law-abiding citizens, people that could be our neighbors in some ways, find themselves, kind of just immersed and intertwined in such a huge criminal operation?
Well, I want to talk about one particular character. It's George Chandler, and if you've seen the series, it's the guy that he does karaoke and he sings to his cows every day. And successful businessman, grew up ultra dirt poor. He didn't have running water until 1986, and they had a well. But he worked his way up, and he built companies, and he made a lot of money, and he was just a really good guy. And he had a best friend, and that best friend is just it's just somebody you trust no matter what.
What was his foster dad? The Dwight
Yeah, it was Dwight.
Baker.
And he just, well, why wouldn't I trust him? We go to church. We're close. He'll do anything. And Dwight lied and said, here's this winning ticket, and it's my buddy who's getting divorced, and he didn't want to have to split the money. And George had gone through a divorce, and he was like, well, I can relate to that, and got wrapped all up into it. And then what was fascinating is this trickle-down effect with his children, that you hear them speak on the podcast, that they very much loved their dad, and kids would make jokes about Monopoly scratch-off and, oh, yeah, you've got these nice clothes because your dad, cheated and blah, blah, blah. But what they didn't know is that their dad, they had those nice things before because their dad worked really hard. And you've got this really fine, upstanding, interesting community guy who's, he sings to cows and he sings karaoke, and he's just this cool, sweet guy that just got blindsided by a close friend or a foster, my dad.
Yeah, and I think, Jonathan, you're hitting on this one piece where it's like, how do these people get involved in that? And I mean, there's all sorts of reasons why somebody might decide to participate in a legal act. And I was doing some research on this, and there's an interesting theory. It's called rational choice theory. And the whole idea is that, and this is more in the organized crime community, but everyone is a free agent who's able to make choices. And the whole idea is that you essentially go through and you weigh the pros and the cons of, all right, well, what's the risk of me getting detected? And what's the punishment for those crimes? And oftentimes there's an economic reason, there's a psychological, there could be a physical, there could be a social and even political motivation behind a lot of these decisions that people make. Like the one individual that really just kind of gets my heartstrings pulled is Gloria Brown. So it seemed like this was just a very traumatic experience for her, and she really wasn't sure in the first place if she should do it, but she was thinking about her overall long-term economic well-being. And I think even Dwight Baker was concerned about his economic position after an injury. And so it's just really interesting to hear the stories of these people and what drove them to say, you know what, I'm not sure how valid this business venture is, but it seems worth it. And was it really?
And I think obviously for this series and this crime, it's a faceless crime. It's against McDonald's. It's against maybe the most successful American, if not global, corporation out there, right? I'm not hurting anybody. They got millions and billions of dollars. What is one little me, kind of winning something in a fraudulent manner going to hurt anybody, right? And yet you hear in the documentary series about how McDonald's, like if it was found out that their contests were fraudulent, and they would lose that trust, which was really interesting because and maybe I feel like the creators are painting McDonald's maybe a little bit more in a altruistic light. I mean,
Yes.
They are they're a fast food business entity. They talked about every time they did this contest, their profit margin went up 30 to 40%. So they're in it for the money. But this idea of people look to McDonald's and they have this positive association with it. And I did growing up too. I love McDonald's.
I still do.
Happy Meals.
The McRib.
McRib. Thank
Ew,
you.
No.
The Hamburglar. Grimace.
Okay, I do like the Hamburglar.
And so I think the fact that they could justify and rationalize that it wasn't hurting anybody could certainly compel somebody to act on that as
Sure.
well.
They're just collecting free stuff.
Right. But at the same time, though, technically, McDonald's was a victim in that situation because, yes, for a corporation to lose trust. Like I think about the business that helped do some of the marketing. I think about the trickle effect that we've already talked about. Yes, Simon, that essentially there was a global impact where people in different countries were negatively impacted by one man and his decision to go about taking these pieces and distributing them as he saw fit.
The business side of this piece, in listening to the interviews of the people who got the contract for the security, they're just these regular guys that built this incredible machine of marketing and security, and like, wow, it had this. This is not really related to McMillions, other than the fact that you put some hard work, you dig in, and you get creative, and you can create some pretty amazing things. I was really impressed with those guys.
Well, and one thing too that this is kind of tangential, but I just think about the strange social community that was influenced here with, I have these Monopoly pieces that are worth $1 million and I'm going to give it to my family member to help them out. And yeah, it was really inappropriate by all means, but the fact that they were giving these pieces to help one another is kind of just a strange thing. It wasn't malicious. Although I don't know if we know the full story, but it's just kind of strange to think about how often when you think of organized crime, there's a lot more negative, violent things. And I don't know if that is true. There probably is, and we just don't know about it.
I want Monopoly to come back so bad I can't stand it. I can't stand it. I think now's the time to do it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they got the free press, right?
It's free press.
And they could add 100% legit, right?
Right.
Can
we figured it out.
You can win $1 million.
Right.
Well, let's wrap this up and look at it maybe a little bit more from a clinical perspective. So we're in session with a client who's expressing a lot of temptation to engage in some type of choice or activity that we, as a mental health professional, sort of see the train wreck or the risks that are involved in that said decision. And maybe your client doesn't see it, maybe they don't care, but they're looking to you for some direction and feedback. How do you meet a client that's talking about some choices or decisions or temptations that, based upon your professional experience, this is not going to either end well for them or the risk isn't worth the reward?
I would probably come at it from motivational interviewing, where essentially, you take a non-confrontational approach and you're trying to collaborate between one another to say, okay, well, what are the pros and cons here? What are you thinking about? And any opportunity you can kind of lean in on some of the change talk where it seems like they might be going in a better direction, then you really try to flesh that out some.
I had a parent recently speak to their child about smoking pot. He started in his later teenage years, and she basically, she was mad at him, but she said, how about let's just do this the right way. Let's look at the science. Let's do some research on the more recent research on smoking pot, on the developing brain and what that looks like. And he went and he actually did the research, and he wrote up a couple paragraphs, gave it to his mom, sat down and talked about it, and he said, okay, I get it. I'm going to wait till I'm 24. But he needed the data, and of course that's not going to be true for everybody, but he just had to dig into it himself and get the data and research so that he could make a decision on his own.
Right, and that's the key. It's like we as professionals could say, no, this is bad, but that will probably push them in a direction that we don't want them to go. Mm-hmm. So instead, we align with them just as a neutral person of support. Sure. And then that way we can say, okay, well, what do you think about this? Because regardless, everyone's going to make their own decisions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When somebody is tempted, they run a high risk of confirmation bias and selective bias, where they're looking for information that just reinforces what they're tempted and want to do. So a lot of times in therapy, I'll talk with my clients, well, let's play the tape through. Let's look at all the different ways that this could play out, ones that are favorable outcomes and ones that are unfavorable outcomes, but getting them to identify and think about that, to break that very selective, narrow mindset that might have, that just kind of really reinforces that self-serving bias, and they end up doing it because they only look for information that really validates their point of view.
Right.
This is good stuff. Well, we could talk about McDonald's, McRibs, McMillions, organized crime, singing to cows, till the cows come
the Church
home.
of the Fuzzy Bunnies.
McRibs.
McRibs.
Oh, yeah, we didn't even get to that.
Get to that. That would be a whole nother episode.
So, but That's going to do it for this episode. I'm Jonathan Hederly here in Charlotte, signing off for Emma Kate Reef and Frank Gaskell. Tell your friends about us and make it a great week.